Ladies and gentlemen, in this video, we're going to be talking about every single Valorant ability and breaking it down from best to worst in this ability tier list. That's right, we're going to rate them all the way from S down to F tier. Speaking of which, this video took me a long time to make, so do me a big solid and smash that sub button. We're going to be pumping out tons of in-depth videos going forward, so make sure that you don't miss out on a single one. Now, before we get started with the S tier abilities, let's set some ground rules. First off, we're going to be talking about abilities used to a pretty reasonably high level. We're not going to assume that the person using the abilities doesn't know how to use it at all, and we're not going to take the bare minimum value. We're instead going to take how much value the ability gets depending on its overall impact when used decently well. Also, some abilities will get down marks if there's another ability very similar but is just better on paper, so definitely keep that in mind. Now, without further ado, the S tier ability, kicking it off with number 1, the best ability in the entire game, Heal Orb. I don't think that I have to talk on and on about how good Heal Orb is. Being able to heal you or your teammates multiple times throughout a game can allow you to all have this thing called Sustain. And what Sustain is it allows you to fight at a full fighting force multiple times over and over again, even after you traded out for kills or took any damage. Healing Orb is a phenomenal ability that is the best ability in the entire game in my opinion, but if you don't agree with me, definitely let me know in the comments down below because I want to hear your thoughts. Now, moving on really quickly, the second best ability in my mind is SPYCAM, simply due to how dramatically it changes the entire game. The fact that you can have a constant flow of information on a site that you're not even on means that it can dramatically change where the enemy is going and allows you to constantly change your game plan and know if an enemy ever rotates to the site that you have your SPYCAM on. So later on, you can leave your SPYCAM on a site, rotate off of it, and you can still have that perfect information. Just because of how much it can change the game, SPYCAM is definitely in number 2. Now, picking up the pace a little bit, number 3 is Sky Smoke. Pretty self-explanatory. A giant duration smoke that is extremely easy to use, and you get 3 of them, plus 1 free per round. Sky Smoke is insane, and it's definitely the best LOS blocking ability. Moving on to number 4, we have Barrier Orb, which Barrier Orb is an amazing ability. Everyone knows the only thing that's bad about it is its cost, but the value that you get from Barrier Orb is immense. It can block physically people from pushing through. It can block LOS. It can stall enemies. Barrier Orb just does so much, and that's why it's in the S tier. Now, moving on to number 5, we have Leer, which might be our first controversial pick. Leer definitely has some counterplay. It can be shot down. It doesn't work from incredibly close ranges, but what it can do is it can go straight through walls, and it doesn't affect your teammates at all. In GameLeap's personal opinion, Leer is the best flash in the entire game, and it's so strong for confirming kills that we have to put it in the S tier. Now, the last ability in the S tier might be a controversial one as well, but we actually have RECON Bolt. Now, RECON Bolt is here for similar reasons as SPYCAM, but the thing about RECON Bolt is it's far better on attack points as well. The thing is, the fact that RECON Bolt's on a 35-second cooldown, if the player that is using it is competent, they know their rollouts, they know how to use RECON Bolt well, you can set up all these unfair engagements, you can get tons of free information. RECON Bolt is an incredibly powerful ability, and for that reason alone, it is an S tier. Now, moving on to A tier, these are abilities that are still fantastic. They're not quite as game-changing as the S tier abilities, but they are still some of the best abilities in the game. Kicking off with number 1, we have Slow Orb. Now, I don't think I need to tell you how good Slow Orb is. It's an ability that can stall entire teams, giving you and your team time to rotate to sites. The fact that you get 2 of them, and the fact that it pretty much stops enemies in their tracks. Slow Orb is an insane stalling utility. In fact, it's probably the best at stalling enemies. Now, moving on to number 2 in the A tier is actually the Owl Drone. Now, Owl Drone allows for a lot of playmaking opportunities. It allows you to throw in your Owl Drone and have an ally follow it up. But the cool thing about Owl Drone is it allows you to completely check out a room. While you could definitely throw some sort of utility through a room, Owl Drone lets you get perfect information about them, which is even better because you can set up a game plan, you could find where enemies are, you could tag enemies. Owl Drone just allows you to get more information, and it's an insanely powerful ability. Do not underestimate it. Now, moving on to number 3 in the A tier, we have DEVOUR. Now, DEVOUR is in the A tier because of just how powerful it is. It gives you use sustain in the same way Healing Orb does, but it only works for Reyna. Now, the cool thing about Devour is that even on pistol rounds, you can heal up past that 100 health point total, which is so insanely powerful. I'm sure you already know, you've already been dominated by this in your games, or you've been dominating people yourself. The only two downsides to Devour is one, you have to get a kill to use it, and two, the fact that enemies know exactly where you are because it needs LOS, so that can be a downside. But even all those things in mind, Devour is still one of the best abilities in the game in A tier. Now moving on to the next ability, picking up the pace a little bit more, we have Dark Cover, which is Omen Smokes, which are definitely not as good as Sky Smoke, but with the buff that changes it to 15 seconds and the ease of use that it now encompasses, Dark Cover is actually a very good smoke that can do a mock Sky Smoke impression, and for that alone, it is in the A tier. Now moving on to 5 in A tier, this one might surprise you, and it's actually Tailwind. Out of all of Jett's abilities, most of them are really underpowered, but Jett is still seeing pro play for one ability alone, and that is Tailwind. Tailwind is the one ability that allows Jett to play untraditional angles, play hyper aggressive, and still get out if she gets flushed with utility or after she trades. Her whole playstyle can completely revolve around Tailwind at a high level, and for those reasons alone, Tailwind has cemented itself as one of the most powerful abilities in the game. Now moving on to number 6 in the A tier, we have Flashpoint, which is Breach's Flashes. Now, Breach's Flashes are incredibly consistent, incredibly easy to use, and they work really well as far as what you would want a flash to do. It doesn't give you that extra versatility as Lear, but it is still an incredibly powerful ability, and it needs to be in the A tier. Now moving on to the last A tier ability, this is TRAPWIRE. Now I know that TRAPWIRE can have a fair bit of counterplay if you just destroy it simply, but the thing is, TRAPWIRE demands respect. You have to constantly be thinking about TRAPWIRE, and especially if you're up against a Cypher and you don't know where the traps are, your whole playstyle could be vastly different. TRAPWIRE can get free kills, shut down opponents, and it is an incredibly powerful ability, definitely A tier worthy. Now moving on to B tier, these are abilities that are definitely incredibly powerful, but they are either abilities that do things a slight better, or the inherent value of these abilities aren't always there. Moving on to the first one in the B tier is Poison Cloud. Now, Poison Cloud is an insane ability on Viper for sure. The fact that you can throw a smoke down, you yourself can go in it to make spike plant plays or try to outplay the enemy. You could pick it up, you could throw it on top of boxes for one-way Poison Cloud spots where you can see the enemy's feet and they can't see you. It is definitely versatile and powerful. The only problem with Poison Cloud is it's a little bit in the shadow of some of these better smokes like Sky Smoke and Dark Cover. While it has its own uses, unfortunately, the fact that you only get one limit the potential possibilities for this orb, and it does share gas tank with the other of Viper's abilities, so while it is very powerful, using it in conjunction with Viper's other ability can be difficult. So for all these reasons combined, it is a very good ability, yes, but it just makes the top of B tier. Now moving on to the next ability in B tier, we have Molly, and this is the Incendiary from Brimstone. Molly lasts so long, and that is why it is so good. It is one of the only abilities like Slow Orb that can single-handedly stop an entire team's push for a certain amount of time. On top of that, you can make plays like throwing it onto the spike to prevent defuses. You can block off complete exit strategies from enemies. It lasts a long time, does a lot of damage. It is incredibly consistent and good at what it does. Now moving on to the next ability in the B tier, we have Blast Pack, Reyna's Blast Pack. Now, Blast Pack is good because it's versatile. It allows you to take the high ground, similar to an updraft or a teleport from Omen. It allows you to actually flush people out of corners. You can break sage walls. You can use it in the middle of the open so that you can wide peek an angle and then blast yourself behind natural cover. You could throw yourself into the fight with your ultimate. It has a lot of versatile uses, and for those reasons, it is an insane ability and it definitely deserves the B tier. Now, the next ability in the B tier, this one might be a little bit controversial. This is Cyber Cage. Now, Cyber Cage isn't the best smoke by any means, but the fact that enemies that push through it make a noise means that enemies aren't going to be pushing through these cages without you knowing and without you being able to shut them down. That's entirely opposite of a lot of smokes where enemies will often push through it and you have no idea. So that means that Cyber Cage is a pretty good ability. It's definitely powerful and it does its job well. Now, moving on to the next ability in B tier, we have Boombot. Now, Boombot is useful for a lot of different things. It can find where an enemy is, it can help you make a swing play on an enemy, or it can just help you win a 1v1 altogether. While a lot of times people use Boombot incorrectly by just throwing it at the enemy team and getting it focused, Boombot is best used in the actual 1v1 because an enemy is forced to shoot it because they don't want to die, of course. Boombot is a great ability. It deserves a B tier spot. Now moving on to the 5th ability in B tier, this is Shrouded Step, which would be Omen's Teleport. Now against high tier players, they're not going to play into this very well because it makes an actual audible noise that can be easily discovered and you can get shut down. But if you either combine it with a lot of action going on or you get really crafty with it, Shrouded Step does something very unique that could set you up for some high impact flank plays. So I have to give it its credit and put it at the bottom of B tier. Now the last ability in B tier is actually Paint Shells. Paint Shells would be a lot higher if we still had 2. The fact that you get 1 but you get another off 2 kills is actually far weaker than it used to be, but Paint Shells is still one of the best zoning abilities in the game, so for those reasons, it barely ekes out B tier. Now we're gonna enter controversial territory, so I can't wait to get roasted in the comment section below. But even if I do me a huge solid and smash that like button at least so that some of the hurtful comments don't hurt too bad. Anyways, moving on to the C tier. Top of the C tier is Curveball, and this is Phoenix's Flash. Now, I know this ability is really powerful. The problem with Phoenix's Flash is, 1, they upped the price, making it quite a bit more expensive than it was, and that's a big deal. It makes it a lot harder to buy these in pistol rounds, especially because they're 200 now instead of 100. It is definitely annoying to say the least. And if you compare Curveball straight up with Leer and Flashpoint, it simply lacks behind just a little bit, and for that reason, it's just at the top of C tier. Now, the next ability in C tier is actually another Phoenix ability, Hot Hands. Now, Hot Hands is a poor area denial ability, unfortunately, but it's a great self-heal ability, which means that it gives and takes. As far as the self-heal ability is concerned, it's actually pretty good, and it makes Phoenix a pretty good dueler, but it does a pretty poor Molly impression, and if you're trying to use it for area denial, it's just not going to do that job very well. Now moving on to the next ability in C tier, we have Dismiss. And Dismiss is the ability where you fade in and out with Reyna. Dismiss is a powerful ability, yes, but it doesn't truly shine unless you're using it with the ultimate. By itself, the problem is, if you just use it to get around a corner, players will often chase you and shut you down. Dismiss gives Reyna flexibility, but it really only works because of Reyna's comprehensive kit, and by itself, it's really not inherently that powerful. Now moving on to the next ability in C tier, we have Fault Line. Fault Line is the stun from Breach, which definitely is powerful if you can hit someone with it. The problem is flashes are generally more consistent than Fault Line. Stunning an enemy means that you can definitely still die to them, and you're not going to be as confident following it up with a swing. Now moving on to the next ability in C tier, the last ability in C tier is actually Toxic Screen. Now Toxic Screen is Viper's ability, the ability that she throws out and she can keep throwing it out over and over. Now I did put it at the bottom of C tier, but I do think this ability is actually really powerful if you learn the rollouts, and it probably might even be in B tier or maybe at the bottom of A tier if I'm really generous. But these rollouts aren't applicable on every map, and you need to make sure that you get them perfectly every single time. Now, the big problem that I have with Toxic Screen, if you throw it up on one map and enemies just rotate off, then it's going to be pretty useless and you can't take it with you. And the fact that it shares the same gas as her other ability, Poison Cloud, means that you always have to choose between using one or the other unless you want it to run out really quickly. But I will say that Toxic Screen is one of the hardest abilities for me to place. Here, I'm putting it at the bottom of C tier for general use purposes, but I do think that with Mastery, it could even be a higher tier ability. Now, moving on to the D tier, these are abilities that are just okay, they're fine, they're not fantastic by any means, but they do their job. Now, the first ability in D tier is actually Blaze, which is the wall from Phoenix. Now, they downgraded its heal, but they upped its duration, which means that it actually heals about the same because the duration is longer. The thing is, it doesn't burst heal you as fast anymore, which means that it can't be used in a pinch to heal you up. It is a better LOS blocking ability, but if you compare it to a lot of other LOS blocking abilities, it is pretty poor all in all. I do like the fact that it can heal you, but it really just does its job decently well, and I'm going to put it in D tier. Now, the second ability in D tier is actually Jett's Updraft. Now, Updraft is definitely pretty powerful, but the thing is, it doesn't provide as much extra utility as some of the other abilities on the list that can still get you vertical height. Abilities like Blast Pack and Shrouded Step allow you to take the high ground while at the same time providing extra utility. The one caveat to Updraft, though, is the fact that it works really well with your ultimate, of course, and that's why it's still going to make it to the top of D tier. Now, moving on to the next ability in D tier, we have Aftershock. Now, Aftershock is Breach's damage ability, and it is a powerful ability. The only big problem about Aftershock is that it takes so long to cast. It usually will get someone out of a corner, but sometimes enemies can maneuver in a way that it will not necessarily flush them out, which could be a liability, and the extremely long cast time means that enemies will always have time to get out of this ability if they see it coming, which they definitely will. Now, moving on to the next ability in D tier, we have Omen's Paranoia. Now, Paranoia is definitely better than it used to be, but if you compare Paranoia side by side with every single flash in the game, it is undoubtedly the worst. I do think that Paranoia is still a decent ability, and it probably deserves a higher tier if I was just valuing it at face value, but I had to knock it off a few simply because, in my opinion, it's the worst flash. Now, moving on to the next ability in D tier, we have Snakebite, which is Viper's damage over time area denial. Now, the problem with Snakebite is it just does less damage than all the other area denial abilities. They really should up the damage on Snakebite if they want to make it viable. It is nice that it has 2 blasts, but it also doesn't cover a wide range, so you have to get it perfectly in a corner if you want to make sure to flush out an enemy. For those reasons, it is at the bottom of D tier. Now, the last ability in D tier is actually Shock Bolt on Sova. Now, you might be saying that you think that this ability is nuts, and I'm a Sova main myself, and I love this ability. The problem is the amount of value that you get at an ability that is so difficult to use, it is really marginal. Shock Bolt can have some crafty rollouts and some pretty niche uses if you check multiple corners. The biggest problem in my mind is that if you hit someone directly with the Shock Bolt, they still won't die if they have full armor, which means that if you check a corner that you don't know an enemy is in, right, and you hit them directly, you don't necessarily know if they're still in there, which is definitely frustrating, and for that I put it at the bottom of D tier. Now, these last two are gonna give me quite a bit of hate because people are gonna get mad that I completely misevaluated these, but these are my 2 F tier abilities. I had to put something in F tier, and in my opinion, these 2 are the worst abilities in the game. Now, the first worst ability is actually Cloudburst on Jett. Now, it does its job. I'm not gonna say that it doesn't do its job on Jett. You throw it down, you walk back, you run away, it does its job. But as far as LOS blocking abilities, as far as smokes are concerned, it is incredibly overpowered. It is very small. It only has a 7-second duration. It is not very versatile. It's hard to get where you want it. There's just a lot of things wrong as far as an LOS blocking ability. Now, for Jett in particular, it is useful, sure, but you cannot say that you would rather have this ability than all kinds of other abilities on the list. It is an incredibly underpowered ability in my opinion, and it gets F tier. Unfortunately, that is just the way it is. Now, the worst ability in the entire game, in my opinion, is actually Stim Beacon. Now, wait a minute, hear me out. Don't instantly smash the dislike button. Stim Beacon can get some use. Here is the problem. Stim Beacon alone tells an enemy where you are, and it's not a very reliable way to take duels if you give your enemy information. Especially in a game where you can get one-shot headshot, how much does it matter that you have an extra fire rate if the enemy knows perfect information where you are? Now, I know that you could say you could combo with an Odin, which, I mean, that's a niche strategy. Why would you want to do that? And you could combo with an entire team, but if you compare Stim Beacon to tons of other abilities on the list, and I mean almost every single ability on the list, it just really is lacking in the power department. So I'm making it my worst ability in the game. But please, 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 if you disagree with me, definitely let me know in the comments down below, because this list was so hard to make. There was so many powerful abilities, and there were some abilities that were powerful that I was putting really low, and I kind of put things where they made the most sense. But if there was any ability in this entire tier list that you think I completely mistiered, definitely let me know in the comments down below. But even if you didn't like the list fully, do me a huge solid, smash that sub button, because at the very least you can't deny that I put quite a bit of effort into this video, and we're gonna be pumping out a lot more videos in the future. So come on board, apply your insight in the comments down below so that we can all grow and make better content together as a community. Anyways, that's all we got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.